what with the tariff situation, I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of getting these.
What our countries could do together is amazing. We like your bicycles, but we have to look after each other. I push him a little bit, he pushed me a little bit. It's beautiful.
So hi everyone, and we're back to do the annual Paris-Roubaix Bikes Are Too Stiff rant, or are we? And why am I only riding one of these wheels on my bike? Why is the rear wheel missing? What is the bike industry's utter obsession with stiffness? We always hear 9%, 10% stiffer than last year's model. These wheels are stiffer than last year's model. This frame is stiffer than last year's model. And then we go and put a bigger tyre on at lower pressure to reduce the system's stiffness, laterally and vertically. It's all a mess. It's all pretty naive asking the tyre to be run at a low pressure to give every kind of ride characteristic on the bike. So suspension, comfort, stiffness, grip, rolling resistance. We're pretty much the only vehicle on earth, apart from a skateboard, which doesn't have suspension yet. And we've gone full circle. We've done suspension on road bikes. We've done carbon spokes. We've done stiff frames, skinny tyres, high pressure, and it's all a bit of a mess. Where am I going with this? I'm a proponent for softening up road bikes, particularly on roads like we have here in the UK. They're all crap. There are some situations where a nice stiff bike and a nice stiff wheel feels great. If you live in Dubai, UAE, certain parts of Spain. But for most of us, speed and endurance comes from being comfortable and powerful on the bike. And we shouldn't just be relying on the tyre. What I've got here is a aramid polymer and titanium spoke hybrid wheel. The rim is essentially pretty standard. The hub is pretty standard. And these spokes can be trued internally just like any other spoke. However, they are by design very flexible. So when I got sent these for testing about 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago now, it really piqued my interest because I don't like having to just drop tyre pressures to get comfort and vibration damping from a bike. I like to run a higher tyre pressure to minimise rolling resistance because the data's out there. Well, here's some outtakes for you. You wouldn't guess it. My favourite bit of rough road for tyre testing has been resurfaced. I don't know what I'm going to do. Driving around trying to find another stretch. It's quite hard to find a stretch to do this because it's got to be like no cars. I've done my own rolling resistance data using a CDA sensor at fixed CDA, but you can do it just using time lapse over rough roads and different tyre pressures. On the smooth stuff, a higher tyre pressure is faster, even on a 32mm tyre, which is what I'm using pretty much all the time. Does this enable me to use a higher tyre pressure? Does the flexibility built into this wheel enable me to run a higher tyre pressure and actually go faster overall? I'll put the results on the screen here. I've stiffness tested these wheels on my kind of lateral stiffness rig, and I'll put all the historic database up on screen. These are down in the 20 newtons per millimetre in terms of the stiffness. Now, that's one of the floppiest wheels I've ever tested. Is it a good thing? From my point of view, yes. Particularly on the front of the bike. If you're crit racing or riding the Tour and you're on smooth roads, probably not. So it's definitely a horses for courses thing, but you get a lot more flex in the wheel laterally. Up and down, the vertical stiffness, I can't really test for that because my rig doesn't test for that. And that's genuinely what you perceive as, I guess, suspension or comfort, which is where we use our big squidgy tyres. But there are so many times when you're riding on the road that the wheel is not dead vertically in plane with the bump input because the bike is rarely upright. If you put an accelerometer on a bike, you measure components in all different directions, not just in the kind of y-axis. Are they torsionally stiff? What does that matter? That's power transfer when you torque the cassette, or when you're braking, how the brakes feel. If you've got a very stiff wheel, ultimately, let's say like the stiffest torsional wheel out there would be a disc wheel, full carbon disc wheel. The brakes feel kind of wooden. If you ever use disc brakes on a disc wheel, you'll know that. And the same, you get that same braking feel on the carbon spoke wheel. Now, the torsional stiffness of a wheel is largely related to the tensile stiffness of the spokes because the spokes can't react to any bending. When you're braking on these wheels, you can feel a bit more kind of springy wind up, particularly on the front brake. And I particularly do like that. I think some carbon spoke wheels can feel very wooden because they are so stiff in tension, the spokes. When you brake on a wheel, you're basically adding tension to those spokes that are trailing the hub tangentially. You can assimilate it to the tensile stiffness of the spoke, whether it's a carbon steel or polymer spoke. When you brake, you're adding like this kind of torsional spring in the middle, and these feel very springy under braking. Can you feel it under power transfer, which is basically analogous? Again, you're torquing the inside of the wheel at the hub. I can't really notice that to be fair, but I've heard some people say they can feel that kind of extra springiness in the wheels. Will this be the nail in the coffin of the carbon spoke wheel? I hope so, but I don't think it will be. But should these be being used at something like Paris-Roubaix? Because if you can keep your tyre pressure optimal for the smoother sections, you don't have that penalty on the rougher sections if you're moving the vibration absorption to the wheel. Now, it's worth just remembering kind of like the basic physics of kinetic energy and how bumps slow you down. So when you're riding along at a fixed speed and you suddenly go from a smooth road transition onto a set of cobbles or some chip seal, you feel like you've just ridden into sand. You feel yourself slowing down, and you can see it on a group ride. If there's some riders ahead of you and they hit the chip seal before you, you approach them, they slow down. And that's because your forward kinetic energy, that's the only kinetic energy you had when you started, some of that is now being converted into vibrating your muscle tissues, your fat, all the liquid in your body. You're a big viscous damper, you're 70% liquid. All that shaking is coming from your forward kinetic energy. So the more you can reduce that, the faster you go over that surface. And that goes for any vehicle. And that's just the basic law of physics. Now, if you can get rid of some of that, even if there is a tiny bit of absorption in these wheels, now that's where we have to be careful, because damping and flex are two different things. But if we can reduce those peak accelerations coming into our body, you will transition onto that rough surface holding more kinetic energy and more forward momentum, and less is going into your body. And around Roubaix time, because when I watch Roubaix, I get so animated at how poor the bikes are at dealing with that kind of environment. Of course, the wheel stiffness is orders of magnitude higher vertically than the tyre stiffness in terms of compression of the tyre. But like I said before, your bump inputs are rarely dead in plane. So if the rider's kind of rolling like this left and right as they're pedaling, and you get a bump input at the bottom, you've got quite a distance here between the rim and the hub for the wheel to flex. The lateral stiffness does give a lot more comfort, I think, of these. Now, coming on to the spoiler, why am I not riding one on the back? Well, they are so flexible. I basically was getting tyre rub. Now, I do like to run a 32mm tyre on the back, always. And I've been riding these wheels across 3 different bikes now. So the Windspace SLC has been my main winter bike. The Framework, which ironically is the only one that I don't get tyre rub in because it's got huge tyre clearance for 45mm tyres, and the TCR. The TCR and the SLC have very, very similar amounts of tyre clearance on the back for a 32. It's about 4 to 5mm maximum each side. I was getting rub on the chainstays on this rear wheel, so I stopped using the rear wheel. I left the front in because there's way more space in the fork, and I'm running actually a 28 on the front of this because of the 25mm internal clearance on these is absolutely massive. That 28 measures up at about 31. So yeah, it's a shame I can only run this on a bike with a lot more tyre clearance. So if you do fancy giving these a go, measure your tyre clearance with the tyre you like riding first. And I would say you need at least 5 to 6mm either side of the tyre measured at the tyre's full inflation pressure before purchasing these, because that is just one of the cons of having such a laterally flexible wheel. They will rub. If you're a lightweight rider, maybe not get such a problem. Depends on the stiffness of the chainstays as well. But do check it, and it's quite disappointing that I can only ride this rear wheel on one bike. I think if you're riding on a gravel bike or an all-road bike with way more tyre clearance like the Framework, you're not going to have any problems, and they are designed to flex. It's hard to put data on perceived comfort, but when I first took these for their first ride, it feels like you're riding with tyres that are 20 psi lower. And I can run the same tyre pressures for way more comfort, or I can run a much higher pressure and get the same comfort. So I don't think it's a win-win, because like I say, is there power loss in that flex? Don't know. We'd have to put it on something like the pedaling rig at Silverstone to find out. That would be a really good test for these. Is that flex actually returning as an elastic element, or is there some sort of huge damping in there that's actually sapping power? I'm not sure. Aerodynamically, they're pretty big, the spokes cross-section. It's probably about 2.5mm round bit of rope, essentially. So aerodynamically, I haven't tested them. To be honest, the aero testing that I was doing on all wheels of similar depths, I'll be honest, without getting paid to do it, it's a massive time suck. They've been pretty bomb-proof so far. The hubs look like something from H-Works, to be honest. Very well toleranced to end caps, very well toleranced axle. If you look past the weird Chinese name, and what is it with these Chinese companies and the weird names like Goosin?
Loosey goosey.
I don't know. I hope you can get a set of these on, I think they're going on Panda Podium next week. I haven't taken any money to test these. I've just been sent a couple of prototype set, and this is kind of the latest set. If you're using them for gravel, I would definitely use them. And you might think that having this kind of aramid or Kevlar polymer spoke is weak. Well, actually, according to their data, this is not mine, but according to the manufacturer's data, the tensile braking strength of this is higher than a Sapim spoke, a Sapim steel spoke. That's the ultimate tensile strength. So you don't need to worry about that so much. But to give you some idea about the stiffness, a carbon spoke, this is quoting their test data as well, a typical carbon spoke you might find on something like a Windspace or a Cadex wheel, you're looking at 800 newtons per millimeter. So to get that carbon spoke to extend by a millimeter when you stretch it, you need to add 80 kilos. These are about 380 newtons per millimeter on the extension test. So about 38 kilos you need to apply to get it to extend a millimeter. So they're less than half the tensile stiffness of a carbon spoke, and coincidentally about 2/3 of the stiffness of a steel spoke. So if you take that as directly related to the comfort or the deflection of the wheel, that's where the flex is coming from. There's not much more I can say about it. The weight, I weighed them before I put them on the bike. I'll put that on screen here, about 1,200 grams, very impressive. And the inner width is 25, and they are hooked, absolutely what you want. And you can true the spokes with a DT Swiss or Park Tool, internal spoke wrench. What with the tariff situation, I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of getting these. I'm not endorsing you buy these. If you want to take a punt on something a little bit different and something super flexible and comfortable, take a punt. But I'm not, it's only been 2 months. I'm not putting my name to these. But I do think it's a step in the right direction towards putting more suspension in bikes and getting bikes to a more suitable vehicle for kind of all roads, and not just smooth tarmac, and chasing this ultimate stiffness dream. And since when did this stiffness metric in the bike industry become the thing to chase? It's crazy.
It's beautiful. They're beautiful. What our countries could do together is amazing. What our countries could do together is amazing. We like your bicycles, but we have to look after each other. I push him a little bit, he pushed me a little bit. It's beautiful.
So any more questions you got about these, let me know down below. Like I said, I'm not fully on board yet. The longevity, it's been 2 months from pretty hard winter testing. The finish on the front hub isn't the effect of it's not like a crackled finish in the anodizing. It's just sugar water from a bottle that exploded on my bike, and I haven't cleaned it yet. Don't get sugar water on your brakes because it makes them howl. But yeah, any more questions, put them down below. Would this be best to use something like Roubaix? I certainly think so, because you're less penalising yourself on the tyre pressure game if you can get some suspension in the bike. God forbid in the next few aeons, maybe we'll get some suspension in bikes. But yeah, cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.